Thank you very much for the generous introduction. My distinguished panelists on the dais, faculty and students of Amity University, ladies and gentlemen. I must first thank Amity to give us this opportunity to come before you and share some of our views this afternoon. NRDC has been in the business of transfer of technology for over 5 decades. We source technologies from a very large number of research institutions, universities, academic mechanisms in the country as well as overseas, and we help build new businesses based on these technologies. The topic for today's session is very interesting. Impact of R&D on corporate competitiveness. However, India's position, India is a young country in this space today. However, India, everybody's talking about emerging economies of India and China to become global players. But let me reiterate, we are not an emerging economy, we are actually a re-emerging economy. Because if you go back 2 millennium, India and China comprised more than 50% of global trade, and that situation continued till about the 1800s. So only in the last 200 years, our economy declined. So we have been in a state of recession for over 200 years. This slide gives a schematic of the relative GDP of various economies. We have the first dark color, dark red is India, followed by China, Japan, US, Europe, and the rest of the world in blue. You find at the turn of the millennium, 0, 80, 180, 1500s, 1800s, there have been some relative positions given in this chart. Then followed by, you find India and China have had a fairly strong positioning in terms of percentage of the GDP of the global the trade up to 1800. Then it dropped dramatically, and only the last decade or two we find there's again increasing share of the global market. China, of course, is growing a lot more rapidly than ours. So, early part, till the 1800s, we were largely an agricultural economy. The inflection point to the industrial economy, Western worlds, moved ahead a lot more rapidly. And today we have reached another inflection point. We're moving from an industrial economy to a knowledge economy. So here is an opportunity. Whenever there's an inflection point like this, there's an opportunity for other economies to jumpstart and take over established players. In the industrial economy, what we see on the left, the tangible physical assets were driving the economy. 80% were tangible assets, like in physical products like cars or automotives or aeronautics or physical objects. The intangibles, which is knowledge based, was a small component, only 20%. But in the knowledge economy is the intangibles, which is knowledge based. That has a dominant contribution, and the tangible elements have a very small contribution. You look at the new age companies which got started in the last 2 to 3 decades. They are major players in this knowledge economy. How do we move in? Here's a quote from Robert Hayes, a professor at Harvard Business School. 15 years ago, companies competed on price. Today on quality. Tomorrow it's design. Design means it's knowledge based. And I would say the Western economies today strongly entrenched in the knowledge based part. Indian economy is catching up very rapidly. Why are we doing this? Why this trend, why this opportunity of jump starting in a phase of transition when we move from a traditional industrial economy to a knowledge economy? I'll just give an example from a quote from George Bernard Shaw. He talks about the business of ideas. In a traditional economy, trade is based on exchange of goods, physical goods. So if you have an apple and I have an apple and we exchange these apples, then you and I are left with one apple each, right? But if you have an idea and I have an idea and we sit across the table over a cup of coffee and exchange our ideas, then each one of us are richer by 2 ideas each. So the entire mechanics of trade, entire mechanics of exchange is different in a knowledge economy than in a traditional industrial economy. If we understand these principles, we can build mechanisms to take advantage of it. I'll just give a few examples, a small example by using the growth in 2 economies, Korea and Ghana. In 1960, that means about 50 years back, the per capita income of Korea and Ghana were comparable. However, as you move ahead, Korea has moved far, far ahead compared to Ghana, though Ghana is very rich in natural resources, much richer than Korea. But Korea could deploy the intellectual capital of the people, of their citizens, and they could improve their per capita income by a very large margin. The difference is the knowledge component. What are the instruments of a knowledge component in a knowledge economy? Now, when you're exchanging apples and when exchanging ideas, apples you can sit across and exchange, but when you exchange ideas and if you want to gain value out of that in terms of money, unless you protect that idea, people just move away without giving you any compensation. So there are mechanisms of protecting the idea so that you can build a model of economic gains. The various mechanisms of managing the intellectual property are concepts like patents, copyrights, trademarks, design rights, know-how, geographical indicators, and traditional knowledge. I'm not going to the details because I'm sure you students of engineering, you would know about these. And this slide gives you the kind of protection that each of these mechanisms offers. And geographical indicators is a mechanism that has been introduced more recently, particularly at the instance of developing economies like India, China, African countries, which are rich in traditional knowledge. Traditional knowledge is the knowledge owned by a community who are practicing that particular tradition. And to ensure that the Western world doesn't hijack that knowledge and make economic gain. Okay, so some of the instances of geographical indicators, but this is not the forum to explain that. So I'm not going to the details. Now, mechanisms of supporting such knowledge creation in a country are developed through the national innovation systems. Now, national innovation system is, there's no one system which is common for each country. Depending on the needs of the country, the strengths and other processes, each country has to develop a national innovation system to support that mechanism. And India also, we have been very actively putting mechanisms in place, especially in the last few years. In the last 5 years, after we became fully WTO compliant on TRIPS, on intellectual property in 2005, we moved very rapidly to develop our national innovation system. Today, for instance, as a researcher or a scientist working in this university, the knowledge that you are creating in your labs out here, there is a law which has just been passed last year which allows the researchers and faculty to make economic gain out of that. You can take a sabbatical from the university for a few years, 2 years or 3 years, whatever the university allows, work in an environment, business environment, create a business or create an economic value, and then you decide whether you want to continue doing that or get back to your university. So these kind of legal systems have been put in place. In the US was very concerned about losing competitiveness in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s to countries like Japan. So they put in place a set of legislations. The most common legislation that we hear about is called the Bayh-Dole Act. The two lawyers by the name of Mr. Bay and Mr. Dole, who were the architects of that act. Basically, that act talked about allowing creators of research, of knowledge, to get into a mechanism of ensuring economic value out of it and get a share of that value. So on similar lines, subsequently in the US in the next 2 decades, about 30 to 40 legislations are put in place. Okay, we have not moved that far in our process, but we've started our journey. And the equivalent of the Bayh-Dole Act is also under discussion in the Parliament. So researchers, scientists, faculty, you have an enormous opportunity to gain and create economic value out of the work that you're doing in the labs. This broadly gives how this innovation takes place. Innovation is not just technology innovation. It's to do with creating products, that is product innovation, it's organizational innovation, it's process innovation. Okay, so all of these components needs to be absorbed and internalized. So you have an issue which is the creation and commercialization, and on the other hand, diffusion and absorption of existing knowledge, creating new knowledge as well as absorbing existing knowledge. You need to mesh that to create new opportunities. The components of the innovation system are education and training, institutions like universities, mechanism of managing that innovation, and the government has a very important role to play to provide an enabling environment. And of course, this needs to be managed with intellectual property that we talked about earlier. If the geography of science and technology is changing, it's shifting. It's shifting from the west to the east. These are few slides about a percentage of publications of world science. You find European Union, there is a kind of stagnant, there's a slight decline in the US overall and an improvement in the Asia Pacific. But if we go subject wise, this is world science and engineering. You find Asia Pacific publications is overtaking that from the US universities. Here in the area of physics, you find we are moving ahead. We've caught on with the European Union. And the area of material science, Asian countries are extremely strong and way ahead of the other groups, larger groups like the US and European Union. That means the output of research from universities and academic institutions are accelerating. Now, this acceleration is done by a very small group of people in the population. It is estimated 1% of the population carries 90% of intellectual capacity. Earlier we had the brightest in the country used to, after their undergraduate work, used to move to the Western world for the postgraduate. So we were losing out. It was called the brain drain. Today it's called a brain gain because the same people are coming back because they see better opportunities here. And it is important that we create good mechanisms and opportunities for this set to attract them back into the country. Because as is stated here, technological creativity and productivity, just like scientific creativity and productivity, are very highly concentrated in a population and in the minds and abilities of a relatively small number of highly talented individuals. Companies should make every effort to retain and nurture these key contributors. Though there is much that's happening in India, though there is a lot of global companies, MNCs are now relocating locating their R&D in India and other developing countries like India and China, India is still way down in terms of the R&D, investment in R&D is concerned. So R&D expenditure as a percentage of GDP in India is less than 1%. It's really 8 to 8.5, 0.8 to 0.9%. In that, somewhere in between that, it varies. Researchers per million population is very low. Well, anything you divide by a billion looks very low. So that's not the area of much concern, but it's an issue. And the size, the quantum of investment, which is defined by the size of the circle, is also rather low in India. So we need to, but whatever knowledge that we have, we need to protect that for a competitive advantage. How is knowledge protected? Shah Jahan, when he built the Taj Mahal, it is said that he cut off the fingers of the artisans so that the Taj Mahal couldn't be duplicated. Do we need to be that drastic? Fortunately, with intellectual property systems in place today, there were no IPR in the 1600s when this was built. But today the intellectual systems are in place under TRIPS, under WTO. WIPO is the body in Geneva which is managing it. We have better ways of managing intellectual property. And this slide shows how seriously countries take management of intellectual property. US is very highly committed. Japan and Germany fairly well committed to protect the knowledge, to protect the intellectual property. We have been a little lax in the past because of historical reasons. And you must have heard the story about the turmeric, which was patented by a US organization, University of Mississippi, for sometime 1995, for its wound healing properties. CSR Lab, a lab network of which we are part of, took this case up in the USPTO and finally won this, and this patent, whatever was taken, was revoked. But sometimes it's not that easy to do that. Recently we heard about the case last year about TVS and Bajaj fighting it out over some technology issues regarding the scooter issues. Sorry. It's a quote from Jack Welch. India is a developing country, but it's a developed country as far as its intellectual infrastructure is concerned. Because he says, Jack Welch, who was then the CEO of GE, he says, we get the highest intellectual capital per dollar here. So there is a lot of value that comes from the research work which is being done here. However, the capturing that value by the companies in India is still rather lukewarm. This slide shows the different sectors which are capturing the value. The line, black line at the top, is the pharma sector, very strong. Pharma sector is the percentage of their sales that they spend in R&D is the highest in the pharma sector, and therefore you naturally find the pharma sector is most globalized among the various other sectors. Another sector which is coming up very well is the auto sector and the auto component sector, which is also increased spending on R&D. Of course, the turnover of the auto sector is so huge, so the impact is still not that visible. IT sector is spending considerably, therefore you see the impact of the IT sector in capturing global markets. but the bottom yellow line is all other industries. Still, unfortunately, R&D is not taken very seriously. Of course, there are exceptions. This slide gives some exceptions. The yellow colors are the pharma companies on this slide. The orange color that you see are engineering companies and automotive companies. HEG, Hindustan Electrographics, they seem to be spending a lot on R&D as a percentage of their sales. And I must tell you, HEG is a leader in the field that they are. We have licensed some technologies to HEG, so we know what they're doing. You see the various sectors. The orange, the dark, the brown sector are the automotive sectors. The green are the other sectors. Now, companies like Hindustan Aeronautics naturally is strongly research-based, so they have a large spending on R&D. Okay, so there are some exceptions like this. However, a survey was done. This is an old survey, about a 10-year-old survey, so may not be applicable today, which basically quizzed CEOs. Which are the factors which are most important for you as priorities to give you competitive advantage? And this survey compared the responses in 1997 and 2001. And it talked about quality as number one. Remember the first quote I gave earlier? They are competing on quality, and tomorrow they'll be competing on design. So at that time, they were competing on quality. So quality is number one. And then the bottom one is innovation R&D. However, what you see, what is very interesting is all the other top three factors between 97 and 2001, the parameters are either shrinking or remain the same. Whereas innovation and R&D as a competitive mechanism and competitive criteria is increasing. Even in that 4-year period is increased substantially. And today, we have so many products that have come out from companies which have strong investment in research. Tata Nano is a glowing example in the automotive sector. And I'm sure the impact of innovation R&D is far more stronger. What is this national spend on R&D in the country? Today, in India, still about 80% of the spend is by the government sector. Private sector is spending only 20%. Unlike in countries like the US or the developed markets, where the private sector have a major spend on R&D. So this is what we need to change. And it's changing. And as we see the private sector becoming more prominent in terms of their commitment to research, we'll find their need to build their businesses based on new products is even more compelling. There are interrelated forces that are changing the economic landscape. These are based on technology progress, entrepreneurship, and global competitive markets. And as our economies are globalizing, as other players, international players are coming into our country and putting their products into our markets, it is imperative that companies in India also use the latest technologies to compete, not just retain the markets in India, but also to get into other markets in other countries. There are many mechanisms of support available. These are some of the mechanisms that I've listed in the Indian Innovation System. And the early stage, you have the TEP program, the Technopreneur Promotion Program from DSI, Department of Scientific and Industrial Research. We have a lot of support mechanisms in place at NRDC. Then you have National Innovation Fund for grassroots level innovations. At a survival phase, you have programs like the TDPU, Technology Development and Demonstration Program, again from DSIR, the Homegrown Technology Program of DST, many venture funding mechanisms available, DST setup, STEPS, Technology Entrepreneurship Science and Technology Entrepreneurship Parks, and TBIs, Technology Business Incubators. And a growth phase, you have the Technology Development Board, again from under DST, then Drug Development Program, Nimitli Program, SIBRI program is there, which is not listed here under DBT, and so on. So there are a lot of support mechanisms which is giving funding. Some of these are grant funds, some of these are soft loans. You know, there are various mechanisms of funding which is available for available to entrepreneurs, and to address the need of the market and to create more employable graduates. You must have read in the newspapers the last year or two, many new universities and institutions are being set up all over the country to ensure that the millions, hundreds of millions of illiterate and semi-literate people in the country get an opportunity to educate themselves and join the workforce in the organized sector, whether manufacturing or services, and move out of the agricultural sector. There are a few examples of technology transfer that we have at NRDC. I can share a few examples with you. First is that of a tractor, 20 HP tractor that was developed at one of our labs, Central Marine Mechanical Engineering Institute, CMERI in Durgapur. This was a need felt at that time because the tractors were being imported earlier in the 60s and 70s, and only large size tractors were imported. Whereas in India, the land holdings are very small, so there was a requirement of smaller size tractors. So this was developed, and it has been licensed to two companies. First one was Punjab Tractors, which was later 2 years back taken over by Mahindra's, and other is International Tractors. Their product is called Sonalika, which is quite popular. Both these companies, the products are very popular not only in India, but even in international developing markets like Africa. Disposable blood bag is another technology that has been developed from Sri Chitra Tirunamal Institute and licensed to several companies. We had taken an equity stake in the first company as well as in this company, and the returns have been fairly handsome. Some of the returns are listed here. And liposomal amphotericin B is a drug that was developed at the Department of Chemistry at Delhi University. We hand-holded the entrepreneurs to do the development work, testing clinical trials, and this have been now commercialized by Life Care Innovations, and it's a roaring success in the market. Thank you very much.